The gallery stood in the middle of the busy city, surrounded by cafes, bookshops, and tall glass buildings. It was not just any gallery. It was a place people whispered about when they spoke of art, a place where the air always smelled faintly of polished wood and fresh paint, where soft classical music floated gently in the background, and where the walls glowed with the warm light shining on carefully chosen paintings. Inside, the atmosphere was calm, almost sacred. Every step felt important, as if walking on that polished marble floor meant entering a world different from the noisy streets outside. People who loved art, who wanted to show off their wealth, or who simply enjoyed being near expensive things, all came there. Some came to buy, others came to admire, but almost everyone left with the feeling that they had touched something rare. The art dealer who worked there thought of himself as the guardian of this world. He walked around in his sharp suit, his shoes always shining, his hair styled perfectly. He knew how to talk about paintings, how to describe colors and brush strokes in a way that made even the simplest canvas sound like a treasure. He had developed a talent for speaking in long, slow sentences, the kind that made people nod and believe him even if they did not fully understand. But there was something else about him. Something less pleasant. He was proud, maybe too proud. He liked to think he could guess what kind of customer had money and what kind of customer did not. He judged people quickly, often just by their clothes, their shoes, or the way they stood. If someone walked in wearing an expensive watch, he would smile and greet them warmly. If someone came in wearing simple clothes, he would narrow his eyes and assume they were just wasting time. This habit of judging gave him a kind of power, or at least he thought so. He believed that keeping the gallery's reputation meant keeping away people he saw as unworthy of being there. He often told himself that he was protecting the art, protecting the gallery from becoming a place where anyone could enter. Of course, the truth was different. The gallery welcomed everyone, but the dealer had convinced himself that his role was greater than it really was. Visitors often noticed his sharp tongue. Some admired his knowledge but disliked the way he treated people. A couple once whispered after leaving that he acted as though he was the artist. Not just the seller, but others, usually those with money to spend, enjoyed the attention he gave them. They liked feeling important, and the dealer was good at making wealthy buyers feel like kings and queens. Over time, the dealer grew more confident in this behavior. The manager of the gallery rarely stopped him. After all, sales were strong and important collectors still came. The dealer's arrogance seemed to fit the image of exclusivity that some customers expected. So he continued each day standing straighter, looking sharper, and believing more strongly that he knew exactly who belonged in the gallery and who did not. He had his favorite moments when he closed a sale for a piece worth tens of thousands of dollars. He would pour champagne for the buyer, shake hands, and watch the painting carefully packed and taken away. In those moments, he felt untouchable, as though he was not just selling art but selling status itself. The gallery's name grew because of its beautiful collection, but the dealer always told himself it was because of him. Still, beneath all the polished surfaces and the glowing lights, there were whispers. Staff members sometimes talked among themselves about his arrogance. Some said it was only a matter of time before he insulted the wrong person. The gallery was too famous, too open to chance encounters, for his behavior to stay hidden forever. Yet the dealer paid no attention. He thought he understood everything, thought he could control every situation. He trusted his instincts too much, forgetting that appearances can be deceiving. On that particular week, the gallery had just received a new shipment of paintings from a well-known artist. The pieces were bold, bright, and full of life, and the dealer was proud to show them. He told himself that these paintings would bring in serious buyers, people who appreciated both talent and price. He walked around the gallery, checking every light, every frame, every shadow, as if preparing for a grand performance. His confidence was at its highest. To him, the gallery was a theater. The visitors were the audience, and he was the star. Every word he spoke about a painting, every small smile, every movement of his hand was part of the show. He believed he could see through people's souls, and he enjoyed proving himself right. This belief, this pride, made him blind to the possibility that one day, someone might not fit into his categories. Someone might surprise him in a way he could never expect. And so the gallery stood, shining under the city lights, full of art and quiet footsteps. The dealer walked among the paintings, certain that he was the master of this world, never imagining that the very thing he was most proud of, his ability to judge people, would soon bring him to a moment of humiliation he would never forget. One afternoon, the gallery was quieter than usual. The dealer stood near the counter, arranging some papers, polishing his glasses, and glancing at the door every few seconds. He was waiting for someone important. A collector he had spoken with earlier that week. Someone who had promised to stop by and see a new painting worth more than $50,000. For the dealer, such visits were the highlight of his job. They meant recognition, respect, and above all, money. But instead of the wealthy collector, the glass door slowly opened and a man stepped inside. At first glance, he looked ordinary. He wore a faded jacket, simple jeans, and old sneakers that squeaked against the polished marble floor. His hair was a little messy, as if he had walked a long distance in the city wind. He carried no shopping bags, no briefcase, nothing that suggested he was there to make a big purchase. The dealer's eyes immediately narrowed. He had seen people like this before, or so he thought. To him they were wanderers, curious visitors who came into the gallery not to buy, but to kill time. Some would take pictures, some would ask silly questions, and others would just stare before walking out. They rarely bought anything, and the dealer hated that in his mind. They were wasting his energy that should be spent on real buyers. The man, however, didn't look around nervously the way some casual visitors did. He walked calmly with an ease that surprised a few of the staff standing nearby. He moved slowly from one painting to another, studying the details carefully. His eyes lingered on the brushstrokes, on the colors, on the way the light hit the canvas. There was no rush in his steps, no distraction in his gaze. He looked like a man who truly loved what he was seeing. Yet the dealer didn't notice this. He only saw the clothes, the unshaven face, the worn shoes, and quickly made up his mind. Another window shopper, he muttered under his breath. Still polishing his glasses, he didn't bother to walk over and greet the man properly. Instead, he leaned against the counter, tapping his pen and pretending to be busy. The visitor stopped in front of one particular painting, a large canvas that dominated the main wall of the gallery. It was the centerpiece of the new collection, full of bold colors and deep emotion. People who had seen it earlier in the week had whispered in admiration. For a moment, the visitor stood silently in front of it, his head tilted slightly, his eyes glowing with a quiet appreciation. He seemed lost in the art, as though the painting had reached out and pulled him into its world. One of the junior staff members noticed this and smiled. She thought it was rare to see someone look at a painting with such honest wonder. But before she could approach him, the dealer walked forward. His footsteps were quick, sharp, almost impatient. He did not smile. He did not offer a polite greeting. Instead, his tone was flat, almost dismissive. "Beautiful, isn't it?" the dealer said, his eyes glancing at the visitor's jacket. "But very, very expensive, far out of most people's price range." He gave a small laugh. Not the friendly kind, but the kind that carried a hidden insult, as if saying, "Don't get too attached, you could never afford it." The visitor turned his head slowly. His expression was calm, not angry, not embarrassed. He simply nodded and whispered, "It is beautiful." Then he looked back at the painting, as though the dealer's words didn't matter. Other customers in the gallery, who had been quietly browsing, noticed the exchange. A couple standing near the corner frowned. They didn't like the dealer's tone. It sounded arrogant, unnecessary, especially when directed at a man who had done nothing wrong. One woman whispered to her friend, "He didn't have to say it like that." But the dealer didn't notice. Or maybe he didn't care. To him, this was part of his role, pushing away the unserious visitors, keeping the gallery's image clean. He folded his arms and stood a step back, already waiting for the man to leave. In his mind, the matter was finished. Yet the man stayed for another few minutes, still admiring the painting. His face was thoughtful, almost peaceful. He didn't look offended, just quietly distant. Finally, he turned, walked toward the door, and with a gentle smile said softly, "Thank you for letting me look." Then he left, the sound of the door closing echoing softly in the quiet gallery. The dealer smirked and shook his head. "Another dreamer," he muttered. Walking back to the counter, he felt satisfied. Believing he had saved himself from wasting time, he picked up his papers again, already thinking about the wealthy collector who might arrive later. But the moment did not go unnoticed. The junior staff member who had seen everything whispered to another colleague, "Did you see how that man looked at the painting? He really cared about it." The colleague nodded, but they both stayed silent. They knew better than to challenge the dealer's arrogance. The visitor, meanwhile, walked out into the city streets, blending with the crowd. No one outside knew what had just happened in the gallery. The dealer thought it was over. Just another day, just another casual visitor. What he did not know, what no one in that gallery yet understood, was that this ordinary-looking man was far from ordinary, and the simple encounter would soon return to him in a way he could never imagine. The next day the gallery opened as usual. Sunlight streamed through the tall glass windows, touching the polished marble floor and bouncing off the golden frames of the paintings. The dealer, as always, arrived early, adjusting his tie, brushing his hair back, and rehearsing his practiced smile in the reflection of the glass. He believed that appearances meant everything, both for him and for the customers who stepped inside that morning. He told himself again that he could always tell the difference between a real buyer and a dreamer. It was his so-called talent, his gift, the skill that made him feel superior to other staff in the gallery. He liked to boast, at least in his thoughts, that he could judge a man within seconds simply by his clothes, his shoes, or the way he carried himself by the afternoon. The gallery was filling with visitors. Some were tourists, holding guidebooks and taking quiet photos. Some were locals dressed in elegance, walking slowly, pretending not to be impressed even when their eyes lit up at the sight of the paintings. The dealer moved among them like a performer on stage, offering smiles to the wealthy and cool stares to those he considered unworthy. Then the door opened, and the same man from the previous day returned. He wore the same kind of clothes, simple and unremarkable, a plain jacket, jeans, and sneakers. His face carried the same quiet calm. He did not rush, did not hurry. He simply walked in, nodded politely at the staff, and went straight to the painting he had admired before. The dealer noticed him instantly. His stomach tightened with irritation. He muttered under his breath, "Why is he back? Didn't he get the message yesterday?" To him, the man was nothing more than a distraction, someone who could spoil the atmosphere for serious buyers. The man, however, didn't seem to notice the tension. He stood in front of the painting again, tilting his head slightly as if seeing it for the first time. His eyes traced the brushstrokes, his lips parted in silent admiration. It was clear he was deeply moved by the art, but the dealer's pride didn't let him see the purity of that moment. Instead, he walked briskly across the floor, his shoes clicking loudly, drawing the attention of others. He stopped beside the man and crossed his arms. "Still here?" the dealer asked in a voice dripping with sarcasm. "I suppose you enjoy looking at things you can't buy." Some customers glanced over, sensing the sharpness of the dealer's words. The man looked at him calmly. His voice was soft, almost gentle. "It's a beautiful piece. I couldn't stop thinking about it." The dealer gave a cold laugh. "Yes, it's beautiful, and it's worth more than some people make in a year. I don't think it's the kind of thing one just dreams about. Unless, of course, one doesn't know his place." His words were like knives, polished but cruel. The man didn't argue. He didn't show anger or shame, he simply nodded. "I understand," he said quietly and looked back at the painting. His calmness seemed to make the dealer even more irritated. For the dealer, this was a performance. He wanted the other visitors to see his authority, to see that he controlled who belonged and who did not. He wanted to show that he was the gatekeeper of the gallery, the one who set the rules. He didn't realize that the very arrogance he thought made him powerful was slowly exposing his weakness. Nearby, the junior staff member watched the scene unfold. Her heart ached as she saw the man's peaceful expression met with such coldness. She whispered to her colleague, "Why does he treat him like that? Can't he see the man truly loves the art?" But the colleague only sighed. They had seen it before. And they knew arguing with the dealer would do nothing. The man finally turned to leave, but before stepping away, he gave the dealer a small smile. The kind of smile that held no anger, no bitterness, only quiet strength. "Thank you," he said softly, then walked toward the door. His steps were steady, his back straight. He did not look defeated, only thoughtful. The dealer shook his head again. "What a waste of time," he muttered. Returning to his desk, he picked up his pen, wrote down notes about a potential buyer, and told himself he had done the right thing. In his mind, he had once again protected the gallery from dreamers. What he did not know, what he could not even imagine, was that his words had just echoed in the ears of a man whose identity was far beyond anything he guessed. He thought he was in control, but the truth was, he had already stepped into a lesson life was preparing for him, a lesson about humility, about respect, about the danger of judging a person by the clothes on his back. The gallery returned to its normal rhythm, Footsteps, whispers, soft music. But beneath the calm surface, an invisible storm was brewing. The man who left would not stay silent forever, and the dealer's arrogance had planted the seed of a revelation that was soon to come. The day after the second encounter, the gallery was busier than usual. A new article had been published in the local newspaper praising the collection, and curious visitors, artists, and collectors had started arriving in larger numbers. The dealer was pleased. He liked days when the gallery felt alive, when footsteps echoed across the marble floor and soft voices filled the air. For him, more visitors meant more chances of making a sale, more chances of showing his authority. Yet deep inside, he still carried irritation from the day before. The image of the man in the plain jacket kept flashing in his mind. He told himself that he had done the right thing, that people like that didn't belong in a gallery of such importance, but something about the man's calm smile had unsettled him. It wasn't anger, it wasn't shame. It was almost as if the man had known something the dealer didn't, and that thought bothered him by the afternoon. The gallery was glowing with golden light from the tall windows. Wealthy collectors had come in, their watches shining, their suits perfectly tailored. Their voices were low, their movements slow. Everything about them screamed confidence. The dealer greeted them warmly, offering soft compliments and long explanations about the history of each painting. He poured them glasses of champagne, smiling with every word. But then, as if the universe enjoyed testing him, the door opened again, and there he was, the same man, in the same simple clothes. Walking in as quietly as before, he didn't carry a bag. He didn't bring anyone with him. He just stepped inside and walked straight to the painting he loved. His face glowed with quiet admiration. The dealer's smile froze for a moment. He quickly excused himself from the collectors and walked toward the man. His jaw tightened, his steps faster. This was no longer amusing to him. He felt insulted, almost challenged. Why did this man keep returning? Why did he keep ignoring the unspoken message that he wasn't welcome? When the dealer reached him, his words came sharp. "You again?" he said, his tone laced with irritation. "Do you really think this is a museum? This is a gallery, a place for serious buyers, not dreamers who waste time staring at things they can't afford." His voice was loud enough for others nearby to hear. The man looked at him, calm as always. His eyes showed no anger, only a deep sadness mixed with quiet strength. "Art is not only for the rich," he said softly. "Sometimes it is enough to look, to feel, to admire." His words were simple, but they carried weight. They echoed gently through the gallery, and a few visitors nearby paused to listen. The dealer scoffed. "Maybe in another place." "Yes, but not here. This gallery represents value, prestige, excellence, and those who walk in should understand that." He folded his arms tightly. His face full of pride, the man gave a small smile. "Value is not always measured in money," he replied quietly. His voice was calm, but every syllable felt like a challenge to the dealer's arrogance. Several customers now turned their heads, watching the scene. Some frowned, disturbed by the dealer's harsh tone. A woman whispered to her husband, "Why is he speaking to him like that? The man isn't hurting anyone." Another man shook his head, whispering, "He looks like he cares about the art more than anyone here." But the dealer didn't care. He felt the need to show power, to remind everyone who controlled the gallery. He leaned closer and hissed, "Admiration doesn't pay the bills. Respect the place and leave before you embarrass yourself further." The words hung in the air like smoke, heavy and unpleasant. The visitor stood silent for a moment, then simply nodded. He turned his gaze one last time toward the painting, as though memorizing every color, every line, and then began walking slowly toward the exit. His steps were steady, calm, unbroken by the insults. As the door closed behind him, the gallery seemed quieter. The whispers of other visitors grew louder. People shook their heads, some glaring at the dealer. But he ignored them, brushing off their opinions. In his mind, he had done his job. He had protected the gallery from what he saw as a distraction. Still, the atmosphere had shifted. The junior staff looked uncomfortable. The collectors who had once been impressed were now glancing at the dealer with doubt. The warmth of the room had faded, replaced by an uneasy tension. It was as if the art itself had grown heavier, weighed down by the arrogance that had just filled the space. The dealer sat back at his desk, pretending not to notice. He told himself again and again that he had done nothing wrong, that he had protected the gallery's reputation, but deep down, a small part of him wondered if he had gone too far. The calmness of the man's eyes lingered in his thoughts, and though he tried to bury it, the memory stayed. What he didn't realize was that the more he pushed the man away, the closer he was to his own downfall. His pride was leading him straight into a trap of his own making. The gallery, the paintings, the wealthy collectors. None of these things would protect him from the truth that was about to be revealed. The man in the plain jacket was not finished, and the dealer's arrogance had just built the stage for the shocking moment that was soon to come. The next morning, the gallery was buzzing with quiet energy. The dealer arrived early, carrying his usual sense of pride. He thought about the encounters from the past few days, but dismissed them as meaningless in his mind. The man in the plain jacket was gone, forgotten, nothing more than a shadow in his perfect world. Today, he told himself, he would focus on wealthy collectors, on sales, on the business of art. By mid-morning, the gallery's manager walked in. The manager was a calm, thoughtful man, older than the dealer with years of experience in the art world. He was respected by the staff not for arrogance, but for kindness and wisdom. Unlike the dealer, he believed that every visitor deserved respect, whether they bought something or not. He often reminded his team that art belonged to everyone, that the gallery was not only a marketplace but also a place of inspiration. The dealer, however, never paid much attention to these words. To him, the manager's approach was too soft, too naive. He believed in status and exclusivity, in keeping the gallery polished and untouchable. That afternoon, while the dealer was arranging catalogs on the front desk, the manager called him aside. His voice was calm but firm. "We need to talk," he said. The dealer raised an eyebrow, curious but not worried. He followed the manager into the small office at the back of the gallery. The door closed and the atmosphere grew serious. The manager leaned against the desk and folded his arms. His eyes were steady. "Do you remember the man who visited these past few days?" he asked. The dealer frowned. "Which one?" "We have many visitors every day," he replied casually, pretending not to care. "The one in the simple clothes," the manager said. "The man you dismissed. The man you spoke to harshly in front of other customers." The dealer rolled his eyes. "Oh, him, yes, I remember, another dreamer, wasting time. Staring at paintings he could never afford, I did the right thing. I protected the gallery's reputation." His voice was sharp, defensive, filled with the same pride that had guided him for years. But the manager didn't look impressed. He shook his head slowly. "You don't understand. That man is no ordinary visitor." The dealer laughed bitterly. "Of course he's not ordinary, he's ordinary and stubborn, coming back again and again for no reason." The manager's eyes grew more serious. His words came slowly, clearly, each one hitting the air like a bell. "That man is the new owner of this gallery." For a moment, silence filled the room. The dealer blinked, certain he had misheard. He let out a nervous laugh. "What are you talking about? That's ridiculous. How could a man dressed like that own this gallery?" The manager didn't smile. He placed a folder on the desk. Inside were documents, official papers showing the recent change of ownership. The dealer's eyes scanned the name, and his heart skipped a beat. It was true. The gallery had been purchased quietly some months ago, and the owner was none other than Keanu Reeves. The actor known worldwide for his humility and generosity. The dealer's mouth went dry. He felt a wave of heat rush through him. He remembered every word he had spoken, every insult, every arrogant remark. He had told the owner of the gallery to know his place. He had mocked him in front of others, treated him like a beggar. The manager's voice broke through his thoughts. He chose not to reveal himself right away. He wanted to see how the staff treated ordinary visitors. He wanted to know if this place was welcoming. "But you showed him arrogance, not respect. Do you realize what you've done?" The dealer's legs felt weak. He sank into the chair. His mind replayed the visitor's calm eyes, his gentle smile, the way he said, "Art is not only for the rich." At the time, the dealer had dismissed those words as nonsense. Now he saw them in a different light. They were not the words of a poor man, but the words of someone who truly understood the soul of art. Shame washed over him, thick and heavy. His chest tightened, his palms grew sweaty. For the first time in years, the dealer didn't feel like the master of the gallery. He felt small, foolish, trapped by his own arrogance. The manager sighed. "Keanu Reeves is a man who believes in kindness, in respect. He doesn't care about clothes or appearances. He cares about honesty, about humility, about love for art. And you treated him like he was nothing." The dealer wanted to speak, to defend himself, but no words came. His throat felt dry, his voice locked inside. All he could do was lower his head, his arrogance melting into silence. Outside the office, the gallery continued as usual. Visitors walked, admired, whispered. The soft music played, the golden light glowed. But inside that small room, the dealer's world had shifted. Everything he thought he knew about power, status, and judgment had collapsed in a single moment. He realized with painful clarity that he had not protected the gallery. He had insulted the very man who gave the gallery its future. He had mocked the one person whose opinion mattered more than anyone else's. It was a lesson he would never forget, but it was also a wound that would not heal easily. For the first time, the dealer felt the weight of humility pressing down on him, and he understood too late the danger of judging people by their appearances. The dealer could hardly sleep that night. His thoughts kept spinning, his heart heavy with shame. He lay awake in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the moments again and again, the words he had said, the cold tone in his voice, the arrogant smile he had carried when he dismissed the man. Now he knew the truth. The man he had mocked was Keanu Reeves. The new owner of the gallery morning came, and with it came a nervous energy he had never felt before. The dealer dressed carefully, even more sharply than usual. His suit was pressed perfectly, his shoes polished to a shine. He rehearsed polite sentences in front of the mirror, sentences full of respect, hoping that somehow he could fix the damage he had done. When he arrived at the gallery, the atmosphere was different. The staff whispered quietly among themselves. They had also heard the news. They knew who the visitor really was. The junior staff member who had seen everything looked at the dealer with a mixture of pity and disappointment. She had always disliked his arrogance, and now she felt he finally had to face the consequences. By noon, the door of the gallery opened, and Keanu Reeves stepped inside. He looked just the same as before, in his simple jacket and jeans, calm and unhurried. He didn't arrive with a grand entrance, no bodyguards, no crowd, just himself, walking with the same quiet steps that had once fooled the dealer into thinking he was an ordinary man. The room seemed to shift when he entered. Some visitors gasped quietly. Recognizing him, others whispered his name. But Keanu didn't pay attention. His eyes moved gently across the paintings, as though he was there for the art alone, not for the attention. The dealer's throat tightened, his palms grew sweaty. He wanted to walk up to apologize, but his feet felt heavy. He hesitated, unsure if he even deserved the chance to speak. The manager standing nearby gave him a firm look, a silent signal that this was his moment to face what he had done. Finally, gathering his courage, the dealer walked slowly toward Keanu. His voice trembled slightly as he spoke. "Sir, I owe you an apology." The words felt strange in his mouth. He was not used to apologizing, not used to lowering his pride. Keanu turned to him, his expression calm, not angry, not cruel, simply steady. His eyes seemed to look through the dealer, as though seeing the truth beyond the polished suit and careful smile. "I was wrong," the dealer continued, his voice quiet. "I judged you by your clothes. By appearances, I spoke harshly. I disrespected you. I am deeply sorry." There was silence for a moment. Everyone in the gallery seemed to pause, waiting for Keanu's reply. The dealer's heart pounded, his chest tight. But Keanu didn't raise his voice. He didn't shame him in front of others. Instead, he spoke softly, his words simple but powerful. "Respect should not depend on appearances," he said. "Everyone who walks through these doors deserves kindness, whether they buy a painting or not. They should leave with dignity." The dealer lowered his head, shame flooding him again. The softness of Keanu's voice cut deeper than anger ever could. It wasn't cruel, it wasn't mocking, it was truthful, and truth had its own sharpness. Keanu walked past him then, moving toward the painting he had admired before. He stood there quietly, his eyes filled with the same wonder as before, as if the insults he had endured didn't matter, as if his love for art was stronger than any arrogance he had faced. The other visitors in the gallery whispered among themselves. Some smiled, touched by Keanu's humility. Others glanced at the dealer with judgment in their eyes. The staff members stood straighter, feeling proud to work in a gallery owned by someone so genuine. The dealer, however, felt smaller than he had ever felt in his life. His world, once full of pride and power, had shrunk. He realized that no expensive suit, no polished words, no arrogance could make him bigger than the simple kindness Keanu carried with ease. After some time, Keanu walked back toward the exit. The manager greeted him respectfully, thanking him for visiting. Keanu smiled warmly at the staff, nodded politely to the visitors, and then quietly left just as he had arrived. The gallery remained silent for a few moments after the door closed. The air felt different, lighter. Touched by his presence, the dealer stood frozen. His apology still ringing in his own ears, he knew he had been forgiven. Not with grand words, but with simple wisdom. It was a breakthrough moment for him. For the first time in years, he truly saw the emptiness of his pride. He saw how quickly arrogance could crumble in front of genuine humility. He understood now that respect was not something to be given only to the wealthy or the powerful, but to everyone equally. That night as he left the gallery, the city lights shining above him, he felt changed. The memory of Keanu's calm voice, the weight of his own shame, and the beauty of that moment stayed with him. It was not just a lesson, it was a turning point, a reminder that life has a way of teaching humility to those who forget it. And though the dealer still wore his polished suits and spoke with elegance inside, he carried a new awareness. He would never again judge a man by his shoes, his jacket, or his silence. He had seen firsthand the power of quiet dignity, and it had shaken his world completely. After Keanu Reeves left the gallery, the silence inside felt deeper than usual. The visitors returned to admiring the paintings, but the mood had clearly changed. It was as if something powerful had just passed through the room, something no one could see, but everyone could feel. The dealer stood still for a long time, his hands cold, his thoughts spinning. He couldn't stop hearing Keanu's voice in his mind. The soft but strong words, "Everyone deserves kindness." Those words had cut through all his pride like a knife through paper. He had spent years believing he was above others, that he had the right to judge who belonged and who didn't. But now that belief felt empty, useless, and embarrassing. He walked slowly to the back office, his shoulders lower than usual. He didn't speak to anyone, not even the junior staff who used to avoid his gaze. Now they looked at him differently, not with fear, but with a quiet sense of justice. He sat down at his desk, but he couldn't concentrate. The computer screen blurred in front of his eyes. His fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of realization. He had insulted his own employer, not just once, but 3 times. He had mocked Keanu's clothes, questioned his right to admire art, and even told him to leave before he embarrassed himself. All those words now echoed in his head, louder than before and sharper. The worst part wasn't that Keanu was famous or rich or powerful. The worst part was that Keanu had shown no anger, no revenge. He had offered only calmness, kindness, and wisdom that made the dealer feel even smaller. Because he knew if the roles had been reversed, he would never have shown that same grace. He thought about how he had acted, how quickly he had judged someone based on appearance. He remembered the simple jacket, the old shoes, the quiet voice, and how he had taken those things as signs of weakness. But now he understood. Those things were not signs of weakness. They were signs of a man who didn't need to prove himself to anyone, a man who knew his worth without having to show it off that evening. The manager walked into the office and sat across from the dealer. He didn't speak right away. He looked at him carefully, as if waiting for the dealer to say something first. Finally, the dealer took a deep breath. "I was wrong," he said. "I was completely wrong." The manager nodded. "Yes, you were," he replied gently. "But what matters now is what you do next." The dealer looked down at his hands. "Do you think he'll fire me?" He asked quietly. "I don't know," the manager said. He didn't say anything about punishment. He only asked me to remind the staff that this gallery should always be a place of respect. The dealer nodded slowly. "I don't deserve to stay, not after the way I treated him." The manager leaned forward, his voice softer now. "People make mistakes, big ones sometimes. What matters is whether they learn from them, whether they change." The dealer didn't respond, but he knew the manager was right. Something inside him had already started to change. The next day he arrived early at the gallery, not out of pride, but out of something new, something that felt like responsibility. He greeted the cleaning staff with a respectful nod, something he had never done before. He opened the doors and welcomed the first visitors with a calm smile. Not forced, not fake, but real. He no longer scanned people's clothes or judged their shoes. Instead, he listened more, spoke less. He found himself watching people admire the art, and for the first time in years, he saw their emotions instead of their wallets. One afternoon, a young man came in wearing a simple t-shirt and carrying a small notebook. He moved from painting to painting, taking notes and smiling to himself. The dealer walked up to him, not with arrogance, but with curiosity. "Do you like art?" he asked gently. The young man looked up. Surprised, "Yes, very much. I'm a student. Just trying to learn?" The dealer smiled, not the old fake smile, but a warm one. "Take your time," he said. "If you have any questions, feel free to ask." The young man nodded gratefully and continued looking. The dealer watched him for a moment and felt something shift inside him. Something good, something right. He had been given a second chance, not by force, not by punishment, but by the quiet strength of a man who had chosen grace over pride. He knew now that he might never fully erase the mistakes he had made, but he could begin to walk a different path. Every day he tried to be better, not for show, not for his reputation, but because he had finally understood the meaning of real respect. He had learned that the most powerful person in the room doesn't always speak the loudest, doesn't wear the finest clothes, doesn't need to prove anything. Sometimes, the most powerful person is the one who forgives, the one who stays silent, the one who looks at the world with kindness instead of judgment. And for the dealer, that lesson was no longer just a memory. It was a part of him now, a quiet truth that would guide him every step forward. Months passed, and the gallery remained as beautiful as ever. The walls still held breathtaking paintings. The floors still gleamed under soft lights, and visitors still walked through the halls in quiet wonder. But one thing had changed completely. The man behind the front desk, the man who once judged others with a single glance, the dealer, once proud and sharp-tongued, was no longer the same. His voice was softer now, his eyes more thoughtful. He had learned to listen instead of interrupt, to observe without judging, and to welcome without conditions. He no longer tried to guess how much money someone had or where they came from. Instead, he treated every visitor as someone worthy of respect. No matter how they looked, he remembered the day Keanu Reeves had walked into the gallery like a quiet breeze. Unnoticed, humble, and full of grace, he remembered how he had mocked him, insulted him, and tried to push him away, and he remembered most of all how Keanu never raised his voice, never showed anger, never tried to embarrass him in return. That memory stayed with him like a gentle echo. It reminded him every day of what true strength looked like. Not in money, not in clothes, not in loud voices, but in quiet dignity and kindness. The junior staff noticed the change in him too. They no longer avoided him. Some even smiled when they passed him one day. The young staff member who had witnessed the incident walked up to him and said, "I'm glad you stayed. You're different now." "And it's good." The dealer looked at her with surprise, then nodded, grateful for her honesty. There were still moments when his old habits tried to return. When he saw someone wearing torn shoes or carrying a backpack instead of a briefcase, his mind would begin to judge, but then he would pause, take a breath, and remind himself of the lesson he had learned in the hardest way possible. One afternoon, a woman came in with her young daughter. They looked a bit tired, as if they had been walking for hours. Their clothes were clean but simple, and the little girl clutched a small notebook in her hands. The dealer greeted them kindly and asked if they needed help. "We're just looking," the mother said gently. "My daughter loves to draw. I told her she could see real paintings today." "Even if we can't buy anything," the dealer smiled. "You're in the right place," he said. "Take your time. There's no rush." The girl's eyes lit up as she looked around the gallery. Her tiny hands flipped open the notebook, and she began sketching one of the paintings with focus and joy. The dealer watched from a distance, feeling something warm in his chest. It was a feeling he had almost forgotten. The joy of sharing beauty with someone who truly appreciated it. Later that day, he wrote a note and handed it to the little girl before she left. It said, "Keep drawing. The world needs more artists like you." She smiled brightly, and her mother thanked him with eyes full of emotion. It was a small moment, but to the dealer it meant everything. It was proof that he had changed, that he was now part of something more meaningful than just selling expensive art. Though Keanu Reeves never returned to the gallery again, his presence was still felt. His quiet lesson had planted something deep in the dealer's heart, a seed of humility that had slowly grown into something stronger. Word of the story had quietly spread among people in the city. Some knew the full truth. Others had only heard whispers. But no one forgot the tale of the man in simple clothes who had been insulted, only to be revealed as the owner, and the kind-hearted soul who forgave without a single cruel word. The dealer, now older and wiser, would sometimes share the story with new staff. Not to shame himself, but to teach, he would say, "Never judge anyone by how they look. I once did, and I nearly lost everything. But I was lucky. Lucky that the man I disrespected chose to teach me with kindness instead of punishment. And so, the gallery stood not only as a place of art, but as a place of learning. A place where respect meant more than reputation, where kindness mattered more than sales. The dealer had been given a second chance not because he deserved it, but because someone believed in the power of quiet grace. That belief changed him forever, and through him, it touched everyone who walked through those doors, because in the end, the true value of a person was never in their clothes, their wallet, or their title. It was in how they treated others, in how they carried themselves when no one was watching, and in how they forgave those who had wronged them. And that, above all, was the legacy Keanu Reeves left behind in that quiet little gallery. Without saying a single word about who he was,